Hi, this is Becky Spain, your instructor for business communication. Today we will be reviewing Chapter 4, Planning Business Messages in Excellence in Business Communication. Now, as we looked at Chapters 1, 2, and 3, we were really looking at the foundations of business communication. We're now starting with Chapters 4 and also with Chapters 5 and 6. We're going to start looking more at the specifics of how do we actually do the writing process. And we will begin by looking at what our learning objective is. Number 1 is describe the 3-step writing process. The 3-step writing process helps ensure that your messages are both efficient and effective. So effective means meeting your audience's needs and getting your points across, where being efficient means making the best use of your time as well as the best use of your audience's time. So the writing process can be divided into 3 phases, and each of the phases has specific tasks. So the first phase is the planning business message stage, or step 1, which is to plan. Well, I don't know about you, but for me, usually the planning is the most boring part. Whenever we're going to do something, I usually just want to jump right in and get started, especially if it's like an art project or something that I'm doing that's artistic. I just want to dive in and start playing with it, see how it feels, and I often want to skip the planning process. However, if you're writing, the planning process is really critical. It's foundational as it helps you to set the stage for what you're going to do. It has 4 steps. You want to analyze the situation, you want to define your purpose, and look at your audience. Who are you going to be talking to? Then you're going to gather information. What information are you going to share for your specific audience? Next, you need to decide how are you going to deliver this message? What's the best medium and channel for this delivery? And finally, you're going to get organized. You're going to determine what is your main idea. What are you going to talk about? What's the scope? How broad are you going to get? Are you going to give an indirect message or a direct message? Which one best meets your audience's needs? And then you're going to outline your content. We're also going to look at steps 2 and 3. Our focus of this chapter is going to be on step number 1, the planning process. Step 2 is writing your business message. So you're going to adopt to your audience. What is it that you're wanting to say? Who is the audience that you're speaking to? You're going to go ahead and actually compose your message. And then step number 3. So once you've written it, the first thing you want to do is read through it. You want to consider what you've written under step number 2 to be a draft. You're going to read through it in step number 3. You're going to revise it. Then you're going to produce the message. You're going to proofread it one last time before you send it out. And then the final stage is to distribute the message. Now, I know at this point you're probably thinking, that's a lot of steps, and I don't need to do all of these steps in order to write a business message. But as you use this model, you're going to find that you're going to get quicker and quicker at actually going through the steps and producing a message. You're going to find that the quality of your work is going to get stronger and stronger so that you're actually going through these steps very quickly and ending up with a good product that you can be proud of in the end. In this 3-step process of planning, writing, and completing, you can optimize your writing time by spending 50% of your time in the planning process, then 25% in the writing process, and 25% in the completing process. And I realize you're probably thinking, why do we have to spend so much time planning? But once again, when you have strong skills and you're going ahead and taking the time to analyze your situation, gather the information that you need to share, choosing your medium and your channel, and then organizing all of your thoughts before you start the writing process, it's actually going to help you to optimize your writing time and get through the writing, the revision, and the finalization process quicker. Let's move on to learning objective number 2, analyzing the situation. Explain why it's important to analyze a communication situation in order to define your purpose and profile your audience before writing a message. So as I shared at the beginning of this lecture, we're actually starting to look at the very specific parts of how do we actually write the business message. So under step number 1, which is planning, the first thing we want to do is to analyze the situation. And we do that first by defining our purpose. So every communication effort takes place in a particular situation meaning that you have a specific message to send a specific audience under a specific set of circumstances. A successful message starts with a clear purpose that connects the sender's needs to the audience's needs. All business messages have a general purpose. That purpose is to inform, or to persuade, or to collaborate. With your general purpose, each message also has a specific purpose, which identifies what you hope to accomplish with your message and what your audience should do or should think about after receiving your message. After you've determined your general purpose and your specific purpose, the next thing you want to do is to make the decision as to whether or not you actually need to write this message. You need to ask yourself, when I write this message, will anything change as a result of that? Is my purpose in writing this message realistic? Is the timing right? Will my purpose be acceptable? Work your way through these questions. You need to remember that for the most part, we receive so many messages during a day that we are either on or very close to message overload. So, is there really a purpose in writing this message? A defined audience really need to know the information that I'm about to share, or will it drive a change of what's happening if I'm sharing information that I think is critical to a decision? Is this the right time to send this message out? I know I used to work in the accounting field and everything was crazy at the end of the month. So if you're not addressing issues that are specific to the focus on the heavy workload at the end of the month as you're trying to get all of those month-end figures in, holding that message until the beginning of the month when things are done for the previous month and all of the work has been completed, you're starting a new month, that might be better timing for your message depending on what your message is. However, if your message is critical to getting the work done at the end of the month, then you might want to go ahead and send that message out even though it's a very busy time for your audience. So you need to analyze your purpose, and then the next thing you need to do is to look at your audience profile. So speaking of your audience, the next step is to identify who are the primary members of your audience. And will they take the time to read or to listen to your message? Are they interested in what you have to say? What size is your audience? To one or two peers is going to have a different tone in different phraseology than a message that's being sent out to a large group of people. Let's say you're sending it to 100 different people in the audience or in your company. It definitely is going to make a difference in how you write your message, how you construct your message, and even the words that you choose. It's also going to make a difference in the level of understanding that your audience members may or may not have. If you're writing to peers, their familiarity with your terminology or even to the subject that you want to address is probably going to be much more familiar than if you're addressing a larger audience. Their level of understanding may be broader, and if you're writing in one message to that entire audience, you're going to have to make sure that you're addressing all levels of understanding as you create that message. You can either do that or you can choose to write separate messages. So I've mentioned before that I used to work with new students as they came to attend the university, and my focus was in helping them to be successful through their first year there at the university. So I would write messages of information, send that out. Usually my channel would be my email. I would do it through email. And I would try to give information to our new students to help them to have a better understanding of how to assimilate to and be successful with their college studies. Well, what I found was that my audience had both brand new freshmen who were first time just graduated from high school. They've never attended college before, but I also had new students in that same group of people I was emailing that were new to the school but not new to college. And I found that I had to not send the same message with the same wording to both groups of students. I had to split them out and write two separate messages. Now, what I was saying was pretty much the exact same information, but how I was saying it and the detail that I was giving was different for the freshman that had just graduated from high school as it was for the student who had transferred from another university. And though they were new at our university, they weren't new to college work. So That would be one example for gauging the level of understanding of your audience members, and sometimes actually having to separate that and write more than one message so that you're addressing each of your audiences in such a way that they're interested in reading your message, because if they're not interested in reading it, they're not going to take the time to read it. Goes right into the next point, which is to check your audience's expectations and preferences. So the new freshman had a different expectation and preference than someone who'd attended before. The third step, to forecast their probable reaction. And once again, this example is perfect because people who were not new freshmen, but new to the university, if I got too detailed, they considered that to be an insult. And of course, they would stop reading the message. So if I really wanted to get that information to them, I had to write it in a different format so that I could get the reaction from them that I wanted to get. The next slide is from page 102 in your book, which basically just summarizes all the points that we had just covered. And then on 102, there's also a view here that shows predicting the effects of audience composition. And take a second to read through that at your leisure. This kind of just drives that point home as to all the different thought processes of the people that you're writing to and how they all may respond to the exact same message. Moving on to learning objective number 3, discuss information gathering options for simple messages and identify 3 attributes of quality information. Gathering information is the second point under the first step of planning your message. Now here you have to consider how complicated the message is that you're wanting to send. For simple messages, you may already have all the information at hand, but for more complex messages, you may need to do considerable research and analysis before you begin the writing process. Many of the business messages that you're going to need to write, you can actually informally gather information that you need. The first step, which once again, over and over again, consider your audience's position. What is your audience's perspective? You can also gather information from the community that you're going to be writing to. Oftentimes you can tap into online discussions, finding something online that might give you information as to what are the community's thoughts and perspectives, and that'll help you to decide how to position your message. Also find that your company has documents that could help you to gather the information that you need, or reports that you could read. And depending on the message, you may even need to talk to, if your audience is some of your colleagues or customers, or if your audience are supervisors, you may actually need to have some quick conversations to gather more information before you put your message together. Now, sometimes in uncovering our audience's needs, the needs are apparent and it's pretty simple, but there are other times when their needs are hidden. So I have a friend and she is a salesperson. She actually sells real estate. And she has a saying that at first I was like, what? But she says that buyers are liars. And I'm like, what in the world are you talking about? And she's like, well, whenever I meet with a client, I ask them what do they want in a house. And then they tell me what they're looking for. And then I look up houses that meet those requirements. And we go to look at houses. And I find out that that's not really what they want, or that's not really what they're looking for. And I thought, I remember doing that one time when I bought a car. And I went to the car lot. And I'm telling them I need something that's economical, that has good gas mileage, that doesn't have a lot of bells and whistles, so I can keep the price down on. And then whenever we started looking at vehicles on the lot, the ones that kept catching my eye were not cars that met that qualification. So finally, I got bored listening to the salesman go on about things that I found incredibly boring. And I'm like, what about that car over there? Can I drive that car? And he looks at me and he's like, that car is nothing that you said that you wanted. And I'm like, yeah, but I really like the way it looks. Can I take it for a drive? And you can guess, I actually ended up buying that car. So sometimes we don't even know what our needs are. And you have to do a little bit of digging to find out, what does your audience actually need? Sometimes it takes a little bit of detective work to find that out, which, going back to the previous slide, doing some asking around, talking to people for input can be a great way to find that out. You need to make sure that you're providing the required information, and a good way to make sure that you've satisfied that is to consider what is called the journalistic approach, which is asking who, what, when, where, why, and how. So as you develop your message, and then also as you go back into the review process, I don't want to jump ahead to that, but I want to make sure that you're thinking about that when you get to that process as well. You need to think about, what do I need to tell them in regard to who, what, when, where, why, and how, and think through each of those as you construct your message. Then you also need to consider, is your information accurate? Quality of what you write is as important as the quantity of what you write. Actually, I would go even further than what the book is saying, and saying that the quality of what you write is even more important than the quantity that you write. You need to make sure that you double check every piece of information that you get, particularly if something that you are writing in your memo is from an unknown source. And make sure that you're finding that information from at least 2 different places before you state that as fact. When I say that I think quality is even more important than quantity, in today's fast-paced world where we want things in small amounts and bite-sized pieces, you want to make sure that what you're saying is correct, but you also don't want to drone on and on and on and on and on about points, because you lose people's attention. So that's another challenge in your writing, is to make sure that what you're saying is accurate and true. You're also wanting to answer the who, what, when, where, why, and how questions as quickly as possible, so that you're not writing 5 pages, because most people are not going to get through 5 pages unless it's some type of report. You're going to need to keep it as short as possible to make sure you're delivering quality information and not going on and on and on. Moving on to learning objective number 4, list the factors to consider when choosing the most appropriate medium for a message. The third point under the planning process is to choose your medium and your channel. So you can think of the medium as the form a message takes, and a channel as the system used to deliver the message. Most messages can be distributed through multiple channels, so the choice continues to become more complex as more options are made available to business communicators, and as we get more and more segmented in how we receive our information. So I'm going to guess chances are you probably don't receive a lot of your information by email, especially if you are younger. And I don't mean to stereotype, as we talked about in an earlier lesson, but normally younger individuals do text messaging much more than email. But for me, if you want to get a message to me, the best way to reach me is through email. I keep on top of my emails, and I like that, especially in business, that it gives me a record that I can notate things that still need to be followed up on. I can flag emails, and I can find emails if there's something I need to refer back to. So for me, that's my preferred way of communication. However, you have to consider your audience and how they communicate, what their preferred medium is. The simplest way to categorize all of your choices are to look at your options as either being oral or written or visual. Under each of these 3 different mediums, you have the choice of doing it in person or digital. So you can talk to someone either face-to-face, or you could use some type of digital channel. Same with written message, and also with your visual. Look a little bit at the detail of each one of the 3 of these. In your oral medium, you have the in-person channel and then the digital channel. Your in-person channel is talking to people who are in the same location with a one-on-one conversation, all the way up to, you could also do through like a formal speech or giving information out at a meeting. And the reasons you might want to use the in-person channel is because it gives you an opportunity to use more nonverbal communication. It also gives you a chance to ask for questions, make comments, and work together to reach a consensus or a decision, rather than having something that's quite so planned that this is it and that's it and there's nothing else. It gives you an opportunity for ebb and flow back and forth. And it can be especially helpful if you have a complex or an emotionally charged situation. Face-to-face can be a good way, but also it's good because it helps you to build working relationships with people at a faster pace, a deeper pace, a more personal pace than if you're emailing people. It's really hard to create a personal relationship with someone that you're emailing or messaging, where face-to-face you have an opportunity to build those relationships, those working relationships more quickly. So your oral medium digital channel would be any transmission of your voice through electric means, both live and recorded like this, including telephone calls, podcasts, and even voicemail messages. Moving away from oral medium onto written medium, the print channel would include things like your memos, letters, reports, and proposals. This is much the classic format of business communication. Memos are brief printed documents. They traditionally used for routine day-to-day exchange of information within an organization, and though I don't see memos being used nearly as much in organizations at this point, there are times that it still is required to create a memo. Letters are brief written exchanges that you can send to customers or recipients. Reports and proposals are usually longer than memos and letters. With the exception of reports and proposals, I would say that while the written or the printed channel is still very useful, for a large part it has been replaced with digital alternatives. Those would include tweeting, texting, website content, and book length reports. And business uses of the written digital messages keeps evolving as companies look for ways to communicate more effectively and once again more broadly, and as their audiences change. And then finally the visual medium, both in your print and in your digital. So your print channel would include things like your photographs, diagrams, charts, and graphs, which can often tell stories that words cannot, or can tell stories more precisely than sometimes words can. These can also be effective ways for conveying emotional content. Think about photographs that have brought emotion to you, spatial relationships, technical processes, and other content that may be difficult to describe using just the words alone. And finally, the visual medium of the digital channel, which includes infographics, interactive diagrams, animation, and digital video. Traditional business messages rely primarily on text, not text messages, but text, with occasional support from graphics. However, many business communicators are discovering the power of messages in which the visual element is dominant and supported by small amount of texts. So sometimes having a picture or having a graph with less text can be more effective in getting your business message across. Visual messages can be very effective, especially in today's environment, for a number of reasons. One, today's audience values messages that can be quickly consumed. You know, we live in the microwave world. We want everything, we want it quick, we want it quick. Visuals are often more effective at describing complex ideas and processes. We also have to think about language barriers that we're often dealing with, and especially in the business world. So sometimes in a multilingual business world, diagrams, symbols, and other images can lower communication barriers by requiring less language processing. So if you are looking at something that's in English and that's not your first language, then having the digital channel engaged can help you to better understand the message, because there's not as many words that you need to translate or translate their meaning or grasp the meaning of which they're being displayed in. Finally, visual images can just sometimes be easier to remember. So it can be a great way to get your message across in a way that can be remembered. And of course, in considering today's environment and the fact that so much is being done on mobile devices, we do have to remember some of the unique challenges that this presents, such as the screen size and resolution, cumbersome input technologies, bandwidths, speed, connectivity, data usage, and operational costs. On page 112 in your book, the authors list several reasons or factors to consider when choosing your media and your channel. And I won't take the time to go through those. I'll let you review those on your own, just in being conscious of the length of this lecture. And let's move on to learning objective number 5, which is explain why good organization is important to both you and your audience, and list the tasks involved in organizing a message. And this is the fourth point under planning your message. So let's look at effective organization. Organization of your message can make the difference between success and failure in delivering the message that you've written. Good organization helps your audience to understand your message, to accept your message, and it saves you time. Good organization also helps you consume less time in actually writing and also in rewriting your message. Also help to build your reputation in the business world as being an effective communicator. And no matter what job you have, that is something that is important to be known for. So let's begin by looking at defining your main ideas. You begin by asking the question, what is the topic? So your topic is your overall subject of the message. Your main idea is a specific statement about your topic. For straightforward informational messages, your main idea is simple. If you have a more complicated persuasive message or a negative message that you have to deliver, try to define a main idea that will establish a good relationship between you and your audience. So whenever you're unsure about what your main idea is, we have some tools to help you to generate creative ideas. And the first would be brainstorming. And when you brainstorm, whether you're doing this by yourself or with a group, you're just literally coming up and generating as many ideas and questions as you can. And don't take time to criticize or to evaluate or even to organize. Just do like a brain dump of all of the things that you can think of. Hopefully you've captured these by writing them down, and then you can look at the main ideas. By looking for patterns and connections, you'll start to see a main idea starting to form. The journalistic approach, which we talked about earlier, another way would be to ask the questions, what do I need to tell them in regards to who, what, when, where, why, and how. Use the question and answer technique, where you start with a key question, thinking about from your audience perspective, and then you work backward toward your message. About young children that you may have in your life who keep asking you questions about why can't we go to the movies? Why does it cost too much? And they keep moving backward on that train of thought, asking why until you finally get down to what is your main topic, your main idea. The book also shares the technique of storyteller's tour, and I have to admit I've never done this one before, but it says that some communicators prefer to actually record themselves as they're talking through their ideas or what it is that they need to talk about, and that helps them to then listen back to themselves talking, and they can pick out what it is that is their main point that they need to begin with. And finally, mind mapping. This is a graphic method where you just start writing down all of your ideas and connect them together and begins to tell a story by using your mapping. There is a diagram of that in your book on page 114. So if that is something that interests you, if you're more visual in trying to organize your thoughts, this may be a great tool for you. This table is on page 113, and I'll let you look at that as you review the information in this chapter. And let's move on to limiting your scope. The scope of your message matches your main idea in every aspect, including the range of information you present, the overall length, and the level of detail. Now you need to limit the number of major supporting points that you give. Once again, remember your audience, and also remember short attention span of your readers, pretty much regardless of who they are. And a smaller number of stronger points are going to be more powerful than a mass of minor points. So if you organize and you find that you have way too many minor points or way too many points, look at how you can group those together to make stronger major points that are fewer in number rather than having so many minor points. Next, you need to choose between using the direct and indirect approach. And the book doesn't really give a whole lot of information on this, but I really consider this to be one of the most critical things that you'll decide in creating your message. As you're planning out what you're going to write, you want to think about whether you want to use a direct approach or an indirect approach. Direct approach, the main idea comes first, and then it's followed by evidence. And you use this when you know your audience will be receptive to your message. And I would say that probably the majority of the messages that you write in the business world will use the direct approach. However, the indirect approach will also need to be used at times. And that's when the evidence comes first, and then that's followed by the main idea. And you're going to use this whenever your audience is skeptical or even resistant to your message. So anytime that you have to deliver bad news to a customer or to peers or coworkers, the indirect approach is going to be the best method. You want to list your evidence as to, like I'm just thinking off the top of my head as I'm doing this lecture, but let's say that no one is going to get afternoons on Friday off anymore, that you had flex time and people were allowed to come in and work a half a day on Friday as long as they made up their time another way. And you're going to have to take that away and no longer be allowed to do that. Okay, that's negative. People are not going to be happy with that. If you start your memo by saying effective in 2 weeks, no more Friday afternoons off, everybody's just hacked right off the bat. So you want to use an indirect approach in creating that bad news information, and you want to give the reasons why you're going to have to make this change. We've had complaints from customers that individuals are not available. That might be one of your points. One of your points may be that it's difficult to keep work moving forward whenever all of the individuals that need to be at the table are not necessarily in the office at this time. What are the financial implications? You need to figure out what are your main, like 2 or 3 points, present that information, and then give the bad news so that as the people read through this message, they can kind of get an idea as to what's coming, and then it makes the message more palatable. It's easier to accept the message. They'll work through their thought process more quickly. So it's really important when you are delivering bad news that you use the indirect approach. And in the business environment, you're going to find lots of times when you're going to have to do that. So I really wish that there had been more information and more examples of that in the book, but the direct approach is what you normally use. This is what the issue is, and then this is the reasons why, where the indirect approach is here are the reasons why, and then this is what the topic of this memo is. So if you have questions about that, please feel free to reach out to me. Once again, you're going to find lots of times when you have to use or determine whether it's going to be better to use the direct approach or the indirect approach as you write your messages based on the information that you're having to deliver. And if you have a split audience and some of it the people are going to be happy about and some of it the people are not going to be happy about, then you need to consider writing 2 separate memos to both audiences so that you are addressing this information in such a way that they will be able to receive it, work through the thought process, and you'll get the results that you want from the message that you're writing. All right. Oops, one more point on that too. Persuasive messages you may also need to use the indirect approach so that you can capture your audience's attention before you try to persuade them. So negative messages, persuasive messages, that's going to be the indirect approach. The direct approach is going to be routine or positive messages. All right, now let's move on. Oh, everyone hates to create an outline, and it doesn't need to be like a technical submit it to your professor type of outline, but even a rough outline before you start writing while you're still in the planning process can help you to save time by helping you to organize your thoughts and create the layout for what you're going to be writing. You're going to have better results. It's also going to help you do a better job of navigating through complicated business situations like we just talked about, and it'll also help you to visualize how parts of the complex message might fit together. Your outline can really be just as basic as what is your first major point, and then your subpoints, your examples, your evidence, any detail that needs to be included if you have a second subpoint, and then what's your second major point. And if you just take the time to outline this, it will certainly help you in the writing process and save you time. Be sure to review the examples that are provided you on page 118 in your book. Take the time to look through those. And then the final item, which does not have a PowerPoint slide, but I want to make sure that we talk about, and that is storytelling techniques. You can certainly build your readers' interests by using storytelling. And we've all been telling stories our whole lives. So narrative techniques come naturally to most of us. And some of us are really great storytellers and some of us are just okay storytellers. But it doesn't make any difference. Using stories can be a really great tool in helping you to get the story out. So the book is an example of someone who is talking about ethics, and they may, in a presentation, just drone on through, this is what you do, this is what you don't do, we can't do this, we can't do this. And then after 30 seconds, usually most of your audience has already lost you and they've tuned out. However, if you take the time to actually tell, and it needs to be a true-to-life story, because you don't want to risk your credibility by making up a story, but if you have a story that you can use to relate why rules are important, you can actually tell the story of what happened when someone didn't follow the organizational rules about ethics and what the outcome of that was, and people will remember that story. And they may not remember all of the can-dos and can't-dos or all of the company policies, but they'll remember that story, which might then help them to either remember some of the rules or to encourage them to delve a little bit deeper into what is the policy. I remember that she told that story and I don't want to make that same mistake, so let me look up the company policy in writing so it can have that same type of overall effect. Storytelling can also help your readers and your listeners imagine themselves living through an experience of the person in the story. If what you're trying to get across has an emotional element to it, let's say you're fundraising for a not-for-profit organization, stories can be incredibly powerful in helping people to see themselves in that type of a situation and how they might want to help out. Using storytelling when appropriate can help you to inspire, can help you to persuade, can help you to teach in a memorable way, and it can also help you to warn. Now remember that every story has 3 basic parts, and we'll end with this, but it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. So the beginning of the story presents someone who's the audience can identify with in some way, and that this person has a dream to pursue or a problem to solve. And then the middle of the story takes what you've given as the beginning and shows this character taking action or making a decision. And then the end of the story resolves the quest. Normally the person in the story is a hero or the person that they're talking about. It resolves the quest and usually offers a lesson to be learned about the outcome as well. So make sure that if you use storytelling that you're looking at the story by telling the beginning of the story, the middle of the story, and then the end of the story. All right, that wraps up for Chapter 4. I will see you guys again when we go through Chapter 5 together.